Hello, I'm Jonathan Dimbleby. Thanks for taking the time to download this edition of Any Questions from BBC Radio 4. Welcome to Doncaster, where we are at Hill House School, which, coincidentally, from our point of view, happens to celebrate, among other alumni, the former presenter of Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson. The school has 700 pupils, girls and boys, and it belongs to the independent sector. It attracts students from the neighbourhood and from further afield. And it's from that catchment area that our audience is here, as usual, on a first-come, first-served basis, the essence of good traditional public meetings open to all. On our panel, Michael Fallon first entered the Commons in 1983. He's been a minister under Margaret Thatcher and John Major, but he is now in the Cabinet and Secretary of State for Defence. Rachel Reeves was elected in 2010. Since then, she's risen to become Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury and latterly, her present role, Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. George Galloway was once a Labour MP, but was expelled after describing Tony Blair, along with George Bush, as a wolf for the invasion of Iraq. Since 2012, he's been the only Respect MP in the House. There are those who think he might seek to become the next Mayor of London. True that you're considering it, or false, George?
False for the moment.
Well, he takes what you want from that, then. Patrick O'Flynn was political editor of the Daily Express, more recently Director of Communications for UKIP before his election as an MEP last May. He's now his party's economic spokesman and the fourth member of our panel. Our first question, please.
Fiona Goldthorpe. In light of the recent criticism David Cameron received for answering an honest question with an honest answer, re not wanting to serve a third term, are we surprised politicians never answer a direct question?
Speaking of yes and no answers, George Galloway.
Well, I do think that tactically it was inept of David Cameron to answer that question in that way, especially as he later conceded that he had not planned to do so. And someone in his position probably oughtn't. And having been a veteran when I was a Labour Member of Parliament, which I was for quite a long time, and knew Gordon Brown for almost forever, I know what it's like inside a party where one person sniffs the possibility of becoming the leader rather than someone else. So I do suspect he's made a rod for his own back. I think that politicians at his level should not make declarations that are unplanned because it'll come back to haunt them. Boris Johnson, speaking of mayors of London, who has been a disastrous mayor, now intends to be both a disastrous mayor and a Tory MP. And I'm here to tell you he's already got David Cameron's number, and he'll do everything that he can to get Cameron out of that position. Of course, I'm hoping that the British electorate will do that job for us.
Michael Fallon, are we surprised politicians, Fiona Goldthorpe asks, never answer a direct question?
Well, I'm surprised. I'm hearing George almost imply that David Cameron shouldn't have given a straight answer, an honest answer. Look, he was asked whether he should do 2 terms, and he gave the answer, and I was hauled on a television programme the next morning, and this was described as David Cameron's admission. It can't be an admission. He was answering the question. And, I don't think the media should always be surprised. I think we should try. We're going to try tonight, I hope. We should try to give straight answers. It's not always possible. But I think we should try to do so. And I don't think the media should be stunned when they suddenly do get a completely straight and honest answer, which is what they got.
Patrick O'Flynn?
They were surprised from David Cameron to get a straight answer.
I don't think you can criticise David Cameron's honesty. I don't think that's the point at issue. And perhaps he was taking a leaf out of Nigel Farage's book, because Nigel Farage, the book literally actually, said recently that if he didn't get elected in South Thanet, it would be curtains for his leadership. And, I rather would have liked him not to have quite been so explicit, to give some of us, to leave a bit more room for manoeuvre, as it were. But that's Nigel being utterly honest. But the problem with David Cameron's position is, one, it was very presumptuous to be thinking about a third term before you'd even been elected to a second term, having not won a clear majority in the first term.
It was a hypothetical question, wasn't it? If you were to be...
He also said he wasn't thinking of a third term. He wasn't being presumptuous. He was the opposite.
No, but he was already sort of mulling over whether yes or no to a third term, but having not properly won a first term and not even got into the election for the second term. But the real key point I want to make is it's literally impossible for a Prime Minister to serve every day of a term if they're not standing at the following election. And that's the absurd position the Conservative Party leader has got himself into, and it will undermine his authority extremely quickly should he continue to be Prime Minister.
You could technically do it, couldn't you? The new leader of the party could be leader of the party at the same time as the President.
Well, technically,
in a parallel way, the United States.
What actually happens is the authority melts away because the party wants to give the new person the best possible pulpit to demonstrate what they've got, and that means making them Prime Minister well before an election.
So you're a lame duck?
Yes.
Rachel Reeves?
Well, in 6 weeks' time, I hope it's something that David Cameron won't have to contend with because he won't have won a second term, and therefore the leadership contest in the Conservative Party can happen straight away and they can resolve it between Boris Johnson, George Osborne, Theresa May, or whichever other of them wants to be leader of the opposition. But I hope that he doesn't have a chance to serve a second term, let alone a third term.
But Fiona Goldthorpe wants to know, are we surprised politicians never answer a direct question?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, he did answer that question honestly, and I think politicians should. We should all this evening, and politicians should give honest answers to honest questions.
So he was right to do it?
Otherwise, you are undermining trust in politics.
So he was right to answer that question?
Yes, of course he was, yes.
OK, Fiona, what do you posed this question?
It's quite refreshing to hear somebody actually say yes and no, and I'm sure Ed Miliband wish he hadn't in PMQs on Wednesday. Let me ask our audience here on this. Who thinks it was refreshing that David Cameron answered that question in that way? Would you put your hands up? Those who think it wasn't refreshing, he shouldn't have answered, would you put your hands up? And who thinks it's a got-up story by the media in any case to get so excited about it? Right, so most people here, overwhelmingly in this audience, they approve of the fact he said that. Overwhelmingly, they think it was a slightly loaded question for me, I suppose, that it was a got-up story by the media. There we are. On to the rest of the programme, please.
John Law. In the wake of cuts in defence spending in recent years, has Her Majesty's government sent the wrong signals to Russia and, lately, Argentina?
The army's been cut back in size, and there is a big question mark over whether or not the 2% goal of GDP spending spent on defence will be met. No party has yet given at least anything like an unequivocal commitment to 2%, although, as we'll hear from UKIP, there are other views. From UKIP now, Patrick O'Flynn.
Oh, yes, actually, a party has given an unequivocal commitment, and that's UKIP. Of course, we shouldn't be a member of the NATO Defensive Alliance and not meet that requirement. David Cameron recently was urging the countries that at the time weren't meeting the 2% requirement to do so. Now, on our figures, the government's going to go to 1.9% in the next financial year. And you know what? A year from now, the spending plans simply run out. There is no departmental budget after 2015-16. The world is not less dangerous. It seems to be getting more dangerous. We have a huge array of threats. We've overstretched our services drastically in the years of this century. And what we need to do now is properly equip them, honour the sacrifices that they've made, and invest in defence. And there are budgets we can cut in order to do that. And UKIP is quite clear about where we should cut. And the obvious first resort for us is this enormous foreign aid budget that keeps going up and up and up every year. And I think millions of Conservative-minded people in the country will really look askance at a Conservative-led government increasing the foreign aid budget by billions while running down our defences.
As economic spokesman, you've presumably done your sums. How much extra, how much do you have to find in order to achieve this objective of 2% year on year until 2020?
Well, at the moment, Jonathan, that's a sort of how long is a piece of string question. We know next year the 1.9% will require
on the projected growth from the Office of...
Next year, if the government's doing its 1.9%, that will require about £2 billion. Now, if we make the assumption that a Conservative government would at least hold at 1.9%, it would average about £3 billion a year over the Parliament, and that's the level of resourcing we have found. If it was actually the case that the Conservatives even dropped below 1.9%, the figures would be more, but we've committed to find extra savings to make sure we can invest that level come what may.
Rachel Reeves, you have not made a commitment to 2%. You've made no commitment apart from wanting to have a strong defence.
Well, we will have a strategic defence review after the next election. We've matched the government spending commitments for the first year of the next Parliament, but then we'll set out for future years. But to answer John's question, I think it is worrying, and we do need to show that we have the defence capabilities to match our responsibilities in the world and to defend Britain against aggressive forces, whether that is terrorists from the Middle East or Africa, or whether it is Russia who are showing military aggression close to our borders. And so that's why we haven't signed up to the sort of spending cuts that the Conservatives set out in the budget last week, because that would mean very deep cuts to our armed forces, as well as our police, our schools, and all the rest of it. And that's why we won't go down that route. And we do, as you say, as you imply, need to protect our country, protect our borders. And I agree with you that things are getting more uncertain out there, not less.
So you have a defence review at which you could say we keep it on the present trajectory, we could increase spending, we could reduce spending quite sharply, but depending on the circumstances, but we will always keep Trident. Is that right?
Well, Ed Balls has, we will keep Trident, but Ed Balls said in response to the budget that the reason we won't sign up to these huge cuts, taking day-to-day spending down to its lowest level since the 1930s, we won't sign up to that because of exactly those sorts of risks that John has implied with the cuts to defence and police and other public services that we rely on to keep us safe.
But neither will you sign up to 2%, will you, Rachel?
We haven't signed up to a specific number, but we've made clear that we don't want to make the sorts of cuts that the Conservatives have set out.
So you're not committed to fulfilling the NATO agreed objective of $2 billion?
We haven't committed to
2%
because we will come in and do our own strategic defence review when we are in government. The Conservatives haven't set out their spending beyond 2015-16, and so we're not in a position to do that.
George Galloway.
Well, you might keep Trident, as Rachel has just pledged, a rare Labour pledge, but in doing so you might well lose half of our country. It doesn't seem to have sunk in to the thick skulls on the Labour front bench that one of the reasons Britain might actually break up is this useless hulk, £80 billion hulk called Trident, which we don't need, can't use, is of no use whatsoever in defending us against the real threats that face us, terrorism from the Middle East and Africa, Rachel, or anywhere else, of course. These are not the only two places in the world from which you can get terrorists. This is a grotesque waste of money. We can't keep our old age pensioners warm in the winter time, but we've got money to burn on a new generation of nuclear weapons. I'm not a pacifist. I was a boy soldier in the Army Cadet Force, and I nearly became a Royal Marine. I'm in favour of defending our country, our people. I'm not in favour of being ordered around by American generals on a visit to London just the other week, ordering us what percentage of our economy we have to spend to keep their military machine well enough oiled. We shouldn't be pledging expenditure that we cannot afford. Our country can hardly pay its national electricity bill. Let's sort our problems here at home and forget about a new generation of nuclear weapons.
But Michael Fallon, hold on. Patrick, I will let you in later. Let Michael Fallon, who is, after all, at the moment, directly responsible for British policy in relation to defence.
I am, and I want to go back to the origin of the question. This country was in a financial mess 5 years ago. There had to be some very painful decisions to get the budget, the public finances in order, because under Rachel's lot, we were spending far more than was coming in taxes. And defence wasn't exempted from that. We had to take some painful decisions at the time. There was a £38 billion black hole of defence equipment that was ordered, but they hadn't properly financed and paid for. We have sorted out the defence budget. It's balanced now. It is, by the way, the fifth biggest defence budget in the world.
Hooray.
It is £34 billion.
Hooray.
It is the biggest defence budget in Europe. And so far as the NATO target is concerned, we are one of only 4 countries in the world, in NATO, that is meeting the target of 2%. We met it, we're meeting it in this current year. We're going to go on meeting it in next year. And we've made long-term commitments to increase our expenditure on equipment. We're building aircraft carriers, hunter-killer submarines, armoured vehicles, ordering joint strike fighters. We're increasing the equipment spend of the armed forces by 1% ahead of inflation for the next 10 years. We've committed to keeping the army now at roughly the size of the regulars that we've got. There aren't going to be more cuts in the size of the army. And we have committed to renewing the deterrent. Every government that has looked at this issue of the independent deterrent has determined when the boats become obsolescent to replace them. And that's the decision we're going to be faced with in 2016 as the original Vanguard boats need to be replaced with a new boat that will last to 2060. That's the decision we will have to take next year. But again, these are long-term commitments that prepare this country and can defend it for years to come. And I can assure you the armed forces will continue to have the equipment and the resources that they need.
Of course, the equipment and resources are part of the cost. At the beginning of this programme, you said we will see if we get some direct answers to questions. If I ask you directly, will you sustain that target, which you have proudly said you have achieved so far, of 2% through the next Parliament, were you to be the government? Will you keep that 2% or not?
No, what I've said is we're doing 2% at the moment.
I know you said that.
And we're going to do it next year. And then we have the spending review in the autumn when we set these figures and we see what GDP is. We set these figures for the next 3-year spending period. When Patrick says it runs out every 3 years. And this autumn, we'll be doing the spending for the 3 years beginning 16-17, 17-18, and then 18-19.
From which it follows it could be less than 2%. You may not honour it.
It's not possible to say now exactly what that figure will be.
But it could be less, obviously.
But you're an unprotected department, and foreign aid isn't. And we know the unprotected departments will take a hammering.
Well, let me just answer that very specific thing. We spend $34 billion a year on defence, as I said. That is 3 times what we spend on overseas aid. And by the way, these are not opposites. We're down in our armed forces are down very bravely, and you heard about the nurses just recovered from Ebola. They're down fighting Ebola in Sierra Leone on our behalf, making sure this dreadful disease does not get into Europe, fighting it down there in Sierra Leone. And that is being paid for largely out of the overseas aid budget. Because
I should hope so.
It's international relief. These aren't opposites. These are things that help keep our country safe, whether it's tackling Ebola, facing up to ISIL, or making sure that we deter Russian aggression on the east of Europe.
Were you, given what Patrick O'Flynn said, were you to seek to meet the 2% target, you would have to cut even more heavily than you are presently committed to cutting, 30 billion or so.
We simply don't. I'm sorry, John. We simply don't know that yet. We don't know what GDP is going to be for the next 3 years. We don't know what the other spending priorities are likely to be. We have this review every 3 years, and we're going to do it. But on the present
projection, Secretary of State, the Institute of Fiscal Studies says that you will have to find those kind of cuts. Now, you rightly suggest that the present projections may be all right, and therefore everything's up the spout. But can I ask you just to comment in that context, if you would, on today's report, the BBC's investigation, which has figures from the DWP that have been leaked to the BBC in some form or another, that in order to meet the benefit cuts, which you are committed to, of 12 billion, amongst other things, you are considering reducing industrial injuries compensation, transferring it to private companies, restricting carers' allowance, disability benefits, disability living allowances no longer tax-free, limiting child benefit to 2 children only. Are these things all under consideration?
No, these are not party proposals. These are options, I think, that some leaked paper, options that civil servants were looking at. These are not party proposals at the moment. Now, it's no secret that, of course, the welfare state can't be exempted from the need to get better value for the taxpayer and to help clear the overall deficit. You can't exempt welfare either, which is why, as you know, we have capped the total that any one particular household can claim, why we're simplifying the welfare system through the rollout of universal credit, and why we've made it more worthwhile to work than to claim. by increasing the personal allowance and making it easier for people to get back into the labour
market.
So
these are civil service suggestions which are under contemplation, but no more than that by the political party. They are under contemplation.
They are not party proposals. Let me just assure you of that. Well, they are not party proposals.
Rachel Reeves.
Well, it seems that these numbers that were commissioned by Conservative ministers of the Department for Work and Pensions are to contribute towards the £12 billion cuts that you've said you're going to deliver in social security, but with no details, and David Cameron gave no details in the debate last night. You know, if you abolish carers allowance, what does that mean for the hundreds of thousands of people who care for sick and disabled relatives? If you restrict disability benefits so that they're taxed, what does that mean for a disabled person who needs that support to get to the hospital appointment? If you abolish the industrial injuries compensation scheme, what does that mean for sick and disabled people? And if those are not the benefits that you're going to cut, are you going to make further cuts to benefits to children or benefits to working families? And with 6 weeks to go, less than 6 weeks to go to the election, the electorate have a right to know what those £12 billion of cuts are going to look like and who are going to be the people who pay the price.
This will be heavily debated in those weeks, and doubtless too on any answers. The number to ring after the Saturday broadcast of this programme is 03700 100 444. The line's open at 12:30. The email address, any.answers@bbc.co.uk. Anita Anand will be there. You can tweet using the hashtag BBCAQ, and you can follow us on @BBC Any Questions. To our next, please.
Martin Lovell. Is a vote for UKIP actually a vote for government by Labour and the SNP?
Michael Fallon.
Yes, almost certainly. UKIP can't form a government. Anything that plays into the hands of David Miliband, you're going to end up potentially with a coalition government between David Miliband and maybe a smaller party or whatever, or you will end up with a Labour government. So the only way you can be absolutely sure of continuing the economic recovery, continuing the very welcome increase in jobs that we've seen, and having a government that will keep our country safe, the only way you can be sure of these things, actually, is by going out and voting Conservative. If you go out and vote for UKIP, you won't even get the referendum that UKIP almost certainly want. The only party that can actually, in government, deliver that first vote on Europe since 1975 is, of course, a Conservative government.
George Galloway.
Well, I always hear this kind of thing. It was used against me. If you vote for him, it's a wasted vote. You'll let someone in or another person in. I'm, I suppose, a living example. If you vote for me, you get me. And if you vote for UKIP, you get UKIP. So I don't buy this, that Michael has just adumbrated all the reasons why you shouldn't vote UKIP, so we can.
But George, for the purposes, for purposes of argument, if there were, for the purposes of argument, only 10 of you, and moreover, if there were so many people who were supporting you through other parties, you might end up by being able to take votes away from, for instance, the Labour Party, but you would conceivably then leave the Conservatives in power.
Rachel correctly put it, a scary thought. She's very scared of 10 of me. She'd be even more scared of 100 of me, because we are the real Labour. We're the Labour that they used to be. That's why it's a scary thought for her.
It's a scary thought, because you sow division. That's why it's a scary thought,
there is a division already in this country, and I speak for the people on one side of that division. You pretend to straddle that division and please one side before then pleasing the other, as you just did on the nuclear weapons question. Michael told you all the reasons why you shouldn't vote UKIP, so you can have that nice Mr. Cameron back in Downing Street, hundreds of thousands of people living out of food banks, cuts to carers allowance. I was at lunchtime awards today for mental health professionals who are bearing in Bradford an £8 million cut in adult services. People at the sharp end looking after people who are the most vulnerable in our society. That's the Tories for you. They don't give a damn about food banks and the people who have to live in them. They don't give a damn about carers. They don't give a damn about the unemployed and the poor. They're a party for millionaires. And the only thing sacrosanct, you'll have noticed, in his programme was weapons and war, boasting that we've got the 5th biggest military expenditure in the world when we're practically bankrupt.
Really?
Briefly, Michael Fallon,
very briefly. I mean, that is simply not true. We do
Which
care.
Which part of it wasn't
well,
true?
let me just deal with employment. Look at the increase in the number of jobs there have been over the last 5 years. There are 1.8 million more people in work now than there were back in 2010. Look at the huge drop in the claimant count up and down our country, not simply in London and the South East. We've had, somebody shouted 0-hours contracts. We've had 0-hours contracts for years. Labour government didn't do anything about it. We've legislated to stop those contracts being exclusive and to retain the flexibility, but making sure that people on them aren't abused. We do care about these things, and we've proved it with the economic recovery and the new jobs that are there.
Rachel Reeves, is a vote for UKIP? In practice, Martin Keith Lovelace, is a vote for UKIP actually a vote for government by Labour and the SNP?
Well, there's only two people who can be Prime Minister after the next election, and that's either David Cameron or Ed Miliband. But it's the responsibility of every party, including my party, to fight for every vote, whether that's against UKIP or the SNP or George Galloway's party or whoever that is. And we can't take anybody for granted. We've got to show that we've got the policies and the values on the National Health Service, on improving living standards. Let me just say this to Michael. You know, you speak about the economy as if everything is rosy, but the number of people on 0-hour contracts has trebled under your government. The number of people paid less than a living wage has gone up by 44% under your government, and the number of people using food banks to feed themselves and their families has gone up to almost 1 million. So this rosy picture that you paint just doesn't accord with the lives of a lot of people here in Doncaster, in my constituency in Leeds, and people around the country. And it's that complacency that I think is the reason why David Cameron won't have a second term as Prime Minister, and why we need a Labour government to put first ordinary working people and our National Health Service.
Vote for Patrick O'Flynn and other candidates, and you get Labour and the SNP. Patrick O'Flynn.
Well, this very clear question seems to have delivered a portmanteau answer embracing the economy too. So very quickly, if I could deal with the economy, it makes me laugh that Labour go on about their bureaucratic living wage campaign when so many top economists now admit that it's open-door immigration which is compressing and stagnating wages for working people, from Mark Carney, Alan Clark at Scotiabank, Jim Nichol at the OBR, Kevin Daly at Goldman Sachs, and now Paul Omorod, the visiting professor at UCL, in The Guardian this week. You are asking working people to vote against their own economic interests, and that's why they're increasingly turning to UKIP. Now,
I don't think the 5 million people who are paid less than a living wage regarded as I don't think the 5 million people paid less than a living wage regarded as a bureaucratic policy. I think they see it as improving their living standards.
If you want to improve living standards for working people, you have to bring the supply and the demand for working class labour into some kind of equilibrium. At the moment, there's a huge reserve army of several 100 million people in southern and eastern Europe that employers, big corporate employers, know they can bring in, and that's why people don't get annual wage rises anymore, and working people have no prospect of it. And that's the argument we're going to make in this
Some of these
figures
also show that employers, for one reason or another, choose to hire, for instance, Europeans from East Europe over and above those who might or might not seek to have the jobs in the leisure industries and elsewhere. Do you not take into account that there is something there as well, that people are available but not equipped to do the jobs?
Well, look, it's not a simplistic single causal issue. We need to improve our education. We need to prepare people better for the world of work. And I give some credit to what the Coalition has done in some of those areas. But shall I get back to the principal point of the question? Now, one thing I will say for Michael is he knows how to deliver a party line, which is why he's often wheeled out when David Cameron has made a gaffe, as he was this week. But I remember back in 2011, we had a referendum in this country about the electoral system, and the Conservative Party popped up, and it said the great thing about first past the post is you just vote for who you really support, and it's as simple as that. Now we're getting this Conservative line that actually UKIP-minded voters, we know you don't like us very much, but we think you hate Labour a bit more. So why don't you vote Conservative and not for who you really want to vote for? And that's a risible and miserable message. And what I would point out is in all the seats in Doncaster, increasingly across the whole of South Yorkshire, it's a UKIP-Labour fight in all of those seats. In Hayward and Middleton, it was the 3,000 Conservative voters that kept the Labour MP in business. And we have shown in those by-elections last year as well, if you vote UKIP, you get UKIP. And I would encourage people to just vote for who they believe in and whose messages register with them best.
But, Patrick, the psephologists who number crunch seem to demonstrate that that there is a higher proportion of seats which are vulnerable, that are Conservative seats to UKIP, than Labour seats, and that would mean that Conservatives would be more seriously damaged. Now, neither here nor there whether that's a good or a bad thing from, position of a chair, but the implication is that would actually, Martin Keith's concern, if it's a concern or question, would be validated.
Well, I think the pollsters also show that this argument isn't found to be persuasive by the electorate. And, far be it from me to advise the Conservative Party on its not terribly inspiring election campaign. But if I were them, I'd find some positive reasons to vote for them and concentrate on that.
Thank you. We'll go to our next.
Alison Jordan. Should Prince Charles be able to write whatever he likes to whomever he likes?
His now famous but unread 27 letters at some point, conceivably somewhat redacted as the technology has it, will appear in public after a to and fro between the Palace, the Attorney General, the courts, and Uncle Tom Cobley, and maybe all as well. Rachel Reeves.
Well, he should be able to write to whoever he likes about whatever he likes, but he now knows that those letters will be published. And my understanding is that he said that he's pretty relaxed about that. And so, those letters will come out and we'll be able to see what he's saying to government ministers. And I don't think there's any harm in that, about knowing what he is lobbying for. The Queen has taken and has rightly remained neutral. And when Charles becomes king, he will have to do that as well. So perhaps there's a lesson there.
Just on the point of substance, it was the Attorney General, of course, who tried to prevent these letters being published, and the instruments under which he did that came in under a Labour government, and Jack Straw was the Justice Minister, who now says that the purpose of opposing the release of those letters from his perspective was to help insulate the monarchy and preserve the necessary confidence between ministers and the constitutional monarchy, and he's therefore still opposed, personally now, of course, to the publication. Are you with Jack Straw on this? Do you think he should have been allowed to have his privacy?
Well, Prince Charles says that he's quite relaxed.
That's not the point I'm asking. The point I'm asking is, do you think that he should be protected from his letters being made public or not?
No, I think it's fine for the letters to be made public, and Prince Charles has said that as well, and they're going to be made public, and I think having that in the public domain will probably be in our national interest.
Patrick O'Flynn.
I'm actually quite interested in what you, as the Prince of Wales's most distinguished biographer, think about this question yourself, Jonathan. But very quickly, what I think is that Prince Charles stands one day to succeed from one of our greatest ever monarchs, who's never allowed her private views to get into the public sphere and has constrained herself to the Privy Council and the audiences she hosts with prime ministers. I think Prince Charles should be more careful as he gets to this stage, not being the young firebrand anymore. I don't think he should be writing so many of these alleged spider writing letters on hobby horse political issues on which the different parties are divided. I think it's a high-risk thing. He would probably be well advised to stop that.
Do you think that he has the right to have confidential correspondence with ministers, like individuals, can have confidential correspondence, or is he, because of his role, excluded from that other right that people have?
Well, clearly, as we now know, if you write letters to ministers of the Crown, there is a risk that someone will decide that freedom of information means they can be disclosed.
So you invite them round to supper instead?
Well, perhaps you do. You'd know more about that than me, probably.
George Galloway?
Maybe Jack Straw's more worried about the replies to Prince Charles's letters rather than Charles's letters themselves. Maybe it will, when they're published, display a level of subservience and a kind of obeisance to monarchy that might be embarrassing to Labour. I don't know. One thing I'm sure of, Charles is entitled to have views. He's entitled to write them down and send them to whomsoever he likes. But he has no right for the public not to know what it is that he is writing, because he is a public servant paid for by us rather handsomely and will soon inherit, well, I don't know about soon, he will inherit when his mother passes, as all must pass. He will inherit a position of immense importance in the British Constitution, which is unwritten but clear enough in this regard, that when you have power, you have responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is that the public must know what it is you're lobbying for. If the Prince was merely opining on the state of British architecture or the environment and general political issues, I think no one will raise an eyebrow at any of that. But if it turns out that he has been specifically pressing and lobbying for changes to policy on rather more smaller matters, as I understand some of the letters may do, then that will be embarrassing for him, and it will be embarrassing for the government ministers. But that's what ministers are there to be, embarrassed.
Right.
Michael Fallon.
Well, I mean, clearly he started writing these letters a long time ago, and he clearly wrote them at the time, on the basis that they would be kept confidential. If that's going to be changed, then obviously he's on a different basis. I think the first point, it is one of the functions of the monarchy to advise and to warn, and he's perfectly entitled to give advice to the Queen's ministers, and he certainly does that. He has a wide range of interests. He does write to a number of Secretaries of State. I have to tell you, he's written to me. He takes an interest in charities, in military charities in particular. He served himself in the military, as you know, much earlier in his life. And I don't think we should begrudge him that role at all. I think he's a man already now of enormous experience over the years in which he's been following these things. And, I would really hesitate to see his ability to take an interest in public affairs, to advise or to encourage ministers. I really would not want to see that curtailed.
So would you, given the ruling that has been made now, would you, if you were in a position to do so, have the law adapted as Jack Straw had originally apparently intended it should be, and clearly when Dominic Grieve, when he was Attorney General, so that the confidentiality of correspondence between him and ministers would be protected in the way that it was intended?
Well, Rachel Reeves has informed us that he's quite happy to have all the letters released.
That's not really the point, is it?
I wasn't aware of that.
Isn't the point
I think
the
there
matter
has
of
to be an
principle?
assumption that he did write some of these letters when he thought they would be kept private. And I think we should, respect that, because that was the assumption under which they were written at the time.
Forgive me, is this about an individual and whether or not he feels happy or unhappy, or is it a constitutional question regardless of who may be in the future the prince or the heir to the throne?
Well, I think it's become a constitutional question because of the freedom of information issue, which wasn't around earlier on. I mean, previous monarchs certainly got involved in matters of state and gave their advice to ministers quite freely. So I think we need to think carefully about this in terms of opening up to correspondence that he originally conceived to be private.
Any answers? You may have thoughts about that. 03 700 100 444. 12:30, lines open. You have to get in early because the lines are always pretty busy, particularly in the run-up to an election. To our next, please.
David Holland. Should we at Hill House School be proud of our old boy, Jeremy Clarkson?
Patrick O'Flynn.
Well, clearly in his time he's been an extremely entertaining broadcaster, but I must admit I was complexed at, signatures of, was it 1 million people saying that he shouldn't be sacked by the BBC because, we're not in Tudor times now. We don't have whipping boys and powerful people can't beat their underlings even if they're members of the Chipping Norton set and friends of the Prime Minister, right? So, and I actually think that, to be honest, to use a broadcasting term, that Top Gear had slightly jumped the shark and that 5 years ago the creativity was more fun and seemed more genuine than it has done.
For those who are in broadcasting and not familiar with the term jumped the shark, could you, and there may be some, myself, could you explain jump the shark?
I think, well, I'll be corrected if I get this wrong, but I believe the origin is to the Happy Days television series where it kind of lost some of its credibility and popularity when the Fonz was doing some water skiing and jumped a shark. And it's sort of said to be the moment where a series loses some of its credibility. But I thought the BBC was quite right.
The most illuminating moment of any questions this year so far.
Just finish. The BBC was quite right to sack Jeremy Clarkson for what he did. It was utterly unacceptable. The one thing I pick a hole with the corporation in this week was that there was a European scrutiny committee.
That's not
at the
what the
House
question
of
is about,
Commons,
but you'll accuse me of bias if I say you're not answering
coverage on the EU.
You're answering another question, but you're entitled to answer other questions. People always do. What do you think about it, Rachel Reeves?
Well, David, I would hope that this school and...
Which David are you referring to?
David who asked the question.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, headmaster. You're headmaster, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you then.
Well, headmaster, if that's the term I should use. I would hope that this school and other schools would teach young people that when they go out, when they conduct themselves at school and when they go out into the wider world, they should treat other people, especially perhaps their colleagues, with respect, and that means not hitting them. And Jeremy Clarkson, as Patrick said, should have been sacked because nobody, however famous they are and however important they are, has a right to thump somebody else because they don't like what they've done. And so I wouldn't be proud if I was this school of your old boy's behaviour this week, even if you may be proud of other things that he has achieved. But I think this week he's not a good role model for other children at this school.
Rachel Reeves. It may not have been heard by all, but one member of the audience said in a quite loud voice, what about John Prescott, who, depending on your perspective, famously or notoriously, went to thump someone in a crowd who'd thrown an egg.
After that person had assaulted him.
Yeah,
I think that's the difference.
Yeah. Thanks, George. I mean, there's absolutely no suggestion that Jeremy Clarkson was provoked in any way before he thumped his colleague. I wasn't there when John Prescott punched somebody, but my understanding is that somebody threw something at him, and John Prescott said, he shouldn't have acted in the way he did, but in that moment, when he thought that he was being physically attacked, he lunged at the other guy. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, but I think there's a big difference between totally being unprovoked and punching your colleague, and I wouldn't be proud if I was at this school of his behaviour this week.
Can I just defend John Prescott here too?
I better just say, I suppose, still technically, allegedly punching, given that the police are looking at this issue.
I think Jeremy Clarkson punched the bloke.
On the John Prescott incident, he had an egg thrown at point-blank range into his face by a much younger and bigger bloke, right? And he reacted. And I thought at the time that he was probably not well advised, but within his rights to do so, and in fact displayed a certain level of physical courage. So I always thought at the time the idea that John Prescott should have to resign or whatever for that was completely wrong. I thought it was a smaller, older bloke defending himself against a member of the public who displayed thuggery towards him.
George Galloway.
Well, I'll always be proud to have been on the Any Questions where the Fonz made it onto Radio 4. I'll take you back further. William Zanzinger killed poor Hattie Carroll, who never once got a chance to sit at the table. She was the waitress, and Zanzinger killed her with a gold-topped cane, and that's Jeremy Clarkson. He is an upper-class bully, a vat of bigotry, and only in the BBC could it have taken weeks to get rid of someone who racially abused an underling and then beat him around the face.
Well, clearly Jeremy Clarkson did wrong. You can't get around hitting people, and it's right that he should now have been punished for it. And I'm quite sure, Headmaster, you don't teach people to hit, but I hope you also do teach forgiveness. I think your pupil should be remembered. I think he should be remembered for being one of the entertainers and produced a programme that entertained millions of people alongside all the faults that have now been described. Now, I've said hitting people is clearly wrong, and it's right that he should be punished for that. But if you're suggesting you shouldn't be proud of him at all, I don't agree.
When this was a running story, but everyone knew more or less what appeared to have happened, and David Cameron said his daughter would be very distressed. Should David Cameron, now educate his daughter into recognising that this was actually the right thing that the BBC did?
Well,
I'll leave it there. You don't want to answer that. Headmaster, you've now been advised by the Secretary of State about how you should regard this. Given that it was a serious thing, is there residual pride still in the school in him for his achievements hitherto?
I think we as a school celebrate success and we celebrate excellence, and he clearly is a very successful journalist and an international broadcaster. But Rachel Reeves is absolutely right. Hitting people is generally wrong.
Any answers? 03 700 100 444. That's all we have time for this week. Next week we're going to be in London at the BBC Radio Theatre, in fact, Broadcasting House, with Angela Eagle, the shadow leader of the House, and the Secretary of State for Business, Vince Cable, and two as yet to be identified others. From here in Hill House School in Doncaster, thank you to the panel, thank you to our audience, thank you to the school. Goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed Any Questions this week. To find out more about the programme or how you can get us to come to your area, then go to the BBC Radio 4 website and search for Any Questions.